Hello, you are watching Simply SCAdian, no title required. This is Zoph, joined by my co-host, the awesome, as always, Lucas, and he's gonna take us into the show while I do my tech girl stuff. Take it away, Lucas.
Hey, everybody. Oh, sorry. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. This is Simply SCAdian, no title required. As always, our mission is to bring you people from around the known world who are experts in their particular field or working on being an expert in their particular field, whether that be fighting, whether that be bardic, whether that be research, as we're going to talk a lot about tonight. And maybe they haven't or don't really see the need to achieve peerage yet or title. And these are the people that could probably know a lot. You can learn a lot from. And again, like I always say, we love our folks with titles, and they have a lot to offer. But sometimes you can find inspiration in any source. So we want to shine a light on those regular folks in the SCA who are really, really knowledgeable in their field. So once again, we invite you, please go to our Facebook page, Simply SCAdian, no title required. Find the form there, fill it out. If you know somebody that we should be talking to, or if you think you're somebody we should be talking to, we want to talk to you about anything. We want to hear your story, how you found the SCA, why the SCA is special to you, and why you love to do what you do. Tonight, and my phone just went out. There we go. Tonight, I'd like to welcome to the show, and I'm going to say it right. I'm going to try. Ceadda of Fox Hall. Ceadda joined the SCA in the Barony of Flame in 2007 after playing in a few closely related time periods. He settled on an 8th century English portrayal, mostly influenced by his love of Yorkshire. His specialty, if he has one, is in historical research and can often be found providing educational lectures on niche subjects at events he attends. He is also an, by his estimation, very amateur portrait photographer and introduced a photo booth at Christmas tourney several years ago. The SCA played no small part in his educational pursuits, as after 12 years in the military, he enrolled in the university for his history degree. He is currently finishing his master's and will begin his PhD program in August. His focus is in the reception and misuse of medieval history. So, Ceadda, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So the first question we ask everybody is, how did you find the SCA?
So I was in the Army at Fort Knox. I was TDY, temporary duty, to Maryland. And I was like, I heard about the Maryland Renaissance Fair. So I go to their website, I look it up, and there was actually a link to the SCA on the website at the time. So I probably didn't sleep much that night as I started researching the SCA as I'm going down the rabbit hole, and found all out about it. And then went to the Ren Fair later that weekend, found SCA people doing information stuff and talked to them. Thought that was great. Finished up my bit of duty there in Maryland, came home, still kind of just sat on it for a bit. And then I went to the education office looking to enroll some college classes. And the secretary who ran the desk, she goes by Tinker in the SCA. And she had Penzic postcards all over her desk at work. And I'm like, hey, I was just reading about that. And so I started talking to Tinker. She brought me to my first meeting and the first event, and all that. I think they are living in West Virginia or Pennsylvania right now. They've had to move recently, but she and her husband are both, Chris and Tinker. She does glass beadwork, he does leather work, and they're both awesome people. They've both been laureled by this point, but this is long before that, and I enjoyed playing with them a lot. So that's how I first discovered the SCA, was online research and encountering someone who had a postcard on their desk.
That's awesome. So we have to say happy birthday, Tinker. It's your birthday today. If you're watching, happy birthday. Okay, Lucas, go ahead.
Okay, so in your bio, you say you bounced around before you kind of came to this 8th century persona. So when you say you bounced around other time periods, where did you play, and why did that eventually come around to Yorkshire?
So it's mostly early stuff. Tinker and Chris, who were my first SCA friends, were members of Ring Tribe. And they did a very first century Iron Age Celtic portrayal. And that's what the whole household did. I fell right into doing that kind of stuff, which is fascinating. You got some Roman stuff, some Celtic stuff, some mixed stuff going on there. tried a few other stuff. I stuck mostly to the early period stuff anyway. But more and more of my own personal research and stuff led to that kind of early English period, the Viking Age, and those type of things. I really got into reading Bernard Cornwell's fictional history of Uhtred and Bebenberg and all that. And not to be that guy, but my own family ancestry, a lot of it comes from the Yorkshire region, comes directly from Leeds and all that. So that's kind of where I landed in that portrayal. There was so much evidence I could find, and a lot of my stuff I try. Most of the garb and the kit and stuff I use is very general, basic, can be traced back to either drawings, carvings, artwork, or archaeological digs, and I keep it to be very basic and that sort of thing. I will wear myself a wool tunic, even though it's too damn hot outside to wear a wool tunic, because that's what I should be wearing. I do have linen, and I will wear linen ones, but yeah, I try to be as accurate as possible. I've also later on, I went to university over in England for a year, and while I was there, I actually ended up joining Regia. So Regia Angelorum, who have a far stricter timeline and authenticity officers and all that, which I was happy to say my kit passed muster on first check. So I was very excited about that. But that's kind of where I ended up. And my own academic studies ended up in the same way, having taken Old English and Old Norse classes and learning those type of languages. 6 years now of Latin and 2 years of Old English and a year of Old Norse. So the more I learn about those cultures, the more I want to portray them in the SCA and kind of play with that as well.
Do you have a website or anything where people can learn more of what you're doing, or am I going to guilt you into making one?
No, I have that imposter syndrome that a lot of academics have, where it's like, why would I have a website? No one wants to read my stuff.
Oh my gosh, I would totally read your stuff. I mean, this is so okay. So, what was it like when you got to go over there for the year? I remember following your studies over in England. Tell me what that was like for you.
So it's funny because my long suffering husband, we actually planned our honeymoon, and I wanted to go to England for my honeymoon. So part of that, we actually started in London, got a car, drove up to Edinburgh on the East Coast, drove back down on the West Coast for 2 weeks. We were there for 13 days of driving and spent a couple days in York, a couple days in Hexham, etc., all over the place. First time seeing the city of York, I fell in love with it. We stayed in a tavern that's from the 16th century for our honeymoon. The bed was like one leg was up on a block because the floor was so tilted. I fell in love with it. And so when I had the opportunity to go to grad school and the VA was still paying for it, I was like, I'm going to shoot for the stars. I talked to my husband. I'm like, I want to apply to York University in England. And I got it. So I got that email at like 6 in the morning and I was in the gym and I had to stop. It's like, I was too excited. So I got to go to York. University over there has the largest center for medieval studies in the world. The school is housed in a 15th century king's palace in York called King's Manor. It's actually where the Council of the North was, where the king made his home for a while. It was also the main part of this that department is actually in one of the monks' residences for the St. Mary's Abbey that used to be there. So I lived within a walled city over there, and my classroom looked out onto the Abbey ruins, and going to the loo, I had to go through archways that were hundreds and hundreds of years old. It was great. It's terrific. So the class itself was awesome. And then the opportunities that I had while I was over there, premier academics were living there. One guy came out of retirement to lead the archaeological class on Sutton Hoo, and took the class down to the mounds and had them blowing horns on the mounds because he was part of the original, some of the early digs there and the cemeteries and stuff. So it's like those sorts of things. My final Old English project was they actually took the original holy book from the York Minster, the big church over there, written in St. Wulfstan's own hand, the letter he dictated for Canute to the English people, so King Canute. And my project was translating that letter into modern English from the actual letter. So from the time of King Canute.
Whoa.
So Yeah,
Dude.
as a historian, I enjoy that. I nerded out.
So, I mean, let's start deep diving a little bit on this, because I mean, it seems like your passion is the research, is looking at the history, obviously seeing how of a living thing it really is. And I think that's something a lot of people in the SCA struggle with, and I have like a lot of questions for you about that. But for you, why research? What is it about it that kind of gets you jazzed and moved in that direction?
I mean, so one example is like I can give, and this is one of the examples I find most fascinating. If you're unaware, Vindolanda was a Roman military town up near Hadrian's Wall, probably the largest town at the time. About the 2nd century or so, it was abandoned. And when it was abandoned, everything was thrown into a refuse heap and burned. During the archaeological digs in the early 20th century, one of the things they pulled out of that heap, because burned things usually destroys it, except for England where it's really freaking wet. And so the fire didn't quite work. So they pulled out these little pieces of bark. And the bark were letters. They're actually now called the Vindolanda tablets. And they were letters written from Rome and other cities in the empire to the people up on the wall. And one of them was a mother in Rome writing up to her son who was stationed on Hadrian's Wall. Your sister misses you. Your father's proud of you. I've sent you some extra socks and underwear. We can't wait to see you when you come home. It's the same exact letter my mother sent me. It's like, 2,000 years separate between myself as a soldier and that soldier up on the wall. I was stationed in Iraq. He was stationed up in Hadrian's Wall, as far away he could possibly be from Rome. And it was the same exact letter. And I will get emotional talking about that type of thing, because it's like, that to me really brings history to life. That these people aren't as far removed as I think they are. They have the same emotions, the same problems, things that we have. And so that kind of leads into what I look for in those research, in those moments. When Alcuin was the lead scholar in York, it was so prevalent that Charlemagne begged him to come to his court, and he becomes this guy who trains Alcuin's kids and tries to create this education system in the early Frankish Empire. It's like, there's emotion behind these things. One of the classes I give is a paper I wrote when I was in York. There's an old English poem called The Wanderer, which talks about this guy's walking along a beach, and he has survived some sort of battle, but nobody else in his band has. And he is hallucinating. He is contemplating suicide. He's asking, why me? And it's PTSD. It's survivor's guilt. I've been in combat. I have PTSD. I have these same questions and thoughts. I'm like, there's so much emotion behind that and the trauma that I've actually now been cited by an Oxford historian talking about trauma in Anglo-Saxon poetry and why it matters. And these are things. There's even in that poem, the end of it, which academically we can argue about who wrote the poem, how many people wrote the poem, where the voice changes. But there's a suggestion of therapy. The end of the poem ends with a guy with the narrator saying, turn yourself to God, go away from warfare, and it will help ease your troubles. It's the same type of therapy you can get today. It's like, seek your higher power, for your trauma, for your stuff. And it's like, so that you even see a reparative therapy being suggested in this poem. So not to be the academic that tries to pre-diagnose people in the past, that's a problematic subject. But these are things that I see when I first look at those good things. So research to me, I look for the people, for the emotion that's there.
I just in my mundane life, I'm a high school teacher. I teach British Lit. And I can't wait to go into class and talk to the kids about The Wanderer again, because we did that back in September. And I want to be like, listen, I heard some other things and I want to bring them up. I know we did that a while ago, but this is going to be cool.
I'll send you my paper if you want, or I'll yeah.
Awesome. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Nope, go ahead. This is your geekdom, Lucas. I'm going to let you take the lead.
Yeah, I know.
You did tell me I could ramble, and I will.
Yes, ramble
please,
all the way.
Please. So I guess we'll start at the basic level for people, because again, I think research in many ways for people in the SA, it becomes daunting. And I've seen a lot of people kind of come out like, how much research is too much? Like where do you start? Like, I mean, and what is a credible source in your opinion?
Credible source. I mean, you can look at the academic published journals on things like JSTOR and things like that. A lot of people like to use EDU. Anybody can put anything out on EDU. It doesn't really matter. So not one of my favorite sources. I mean, it's, books that are published by people with bona fides, with PhDs, are usually a safer source. Not always. There are crazy people with PhDs. But those are usually a safer source to start with. But if you're just starting out, start with the basics. It's like, if you find a translation of Old English poetry or the Eddas or whatever interests you. I'm not even a fan of poetry. I don't like poetry. I am an unmusical person. I've never had a song stuck in my head, and I don't understand poetic meters at all. So it's like, to me, it's more about the translation of the words and understanding that every translation is an interpretation. If you look a lot of the stuff that was done in the Victorian age, which is part of my current research, they added a lot of stuff that we wouldn't have added, that we wouldn't include in there, because they want to make things a little more flowery, a lot of these and thous and those and things that weren't necessarily there. So, and so there's a lot of arguments over what those Victorian guys are doing. There's actually a translation I was reading recently from actually a Latin thing in the Victorian age, where there's a chapter of this book on fornication. And underneath it just said, we decided not to translate this. Because proprietary in the Victorian age, it's like, really? You're just going to skip over that part? And that document doesn't exist anymore, by the way. So there is no original document anymore. So that is now lost for all intents and purposes, because they decided not to translate it. So, but that in itself is an interesting choice and tells you about the people that were researching history at the time. Sorry, trying to stay focused to the question about where do you start. You find something you're interested in. To me, the Wanderer jumped out at me because I'm a soldier. So I was 12 years in the military, and out of all the poems in the Exeter book, that one jumped out at me because I could identify with it. So, and that's kind of where I started with that in that situation.
I will add, I've always tell people and my apprentices to start at Wikipedia and go all the way to the bottom of the page and read the bibliography, and then get those books, and then look at their bibliographies. And then I tell people to take index cards. I keep index cards in my desk at all times, and I write down every book I touch, and it helps me keep track of interesting things that I find. Sorry, go ahead, Ceadda.
Well, no, it's like, Wikipedia it can be a great source to find out things that interest you. Historical fiction, I told you the Bernard Cornwell stories were kind of inspired me to look at some of the stuff that's going on in Northumbria during the Viking Age. It's historical fiction. It's well-researched historical fiction. Like any nerdy medievalist, I fell in love with King Arthur as a child. So in the Merlin stories, and I've read, Merlin Dreams and the Crystal Cave and all these things that, I loved as a young adult and as a teenager and as a kid, and so I've always had that love of the Middle Ages. It took me, I think I was my sophomore in high school, and I realized that Disney's Sword of the Stone is T.H. White's book, word for word. It's like, oh, it's an actual book. It's a thing. So, fiction and fantasy is not a bad way to start with these things. It will tell you what you're really interested in. So
right.
But,
so I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, because I completely forgot the question. Lucas, what were you?
So what's your process like? Like, do you just like let's say you're going to put a class together. Do you come up with the topic and then research it, or did you research it? You're doing your research and you're like, this would make a good class, or is it a combination of both?
So 90% of my classes I teach are usually papers that I've worked on for some class. So usually some 20, 25 page research paper that I've had to do that I'm like, I could turn this into a class and people might be interested in it. So I've given classes on the 13th century English idea of the third gender of the clergy. So dealing with sexuality, what's masculine, what's feminine, what's neither. I've given one on the Wanderer. I've given one on Anglo-Saxon fortifications in the Viking Age, how they fortified the cities and built the Birdle network and the beacon system, that the whole Lord of the Rings, the beacons are lit. That's all based on something that actually happened. So usually that's the paper. I just gave a class for RUM, the Royal University of the Mid-Realm. I just gave a class. I gave two of them, One based on a research paper I just finished, and one that was basically me rambling about my current research. I called it Victorians and Vikings, or Vikings Victorians. I forgot what I called it now at this point. Basically, how the Victorians invented what we call the Viking Age. So, because of their current interest in, things like the fact that their literacy rate was increasing at a exponential rate at the time. So, and what was happening in the Victorian age that people suddenly became interested in this Viking stuff.
Which hasn't stopped. So what did they get wrong?
The horned helmets and the winged helmets and all that from the Wagner operas were one thing, but there was, there's a whole bunch of stuff. Basically, there was a bunch of stuff happening at the time that suddenly people started digging up grave mounds, like, oh, there's a boat. Oh, I bet it's a Viking boat. But I mean, the translations of like the Eddas and stuff, those were happening. I think one of the earliest translations of the Eddas went from Old Norse into Latin in the 15th century, 16th century, 15 maybe, up in Scotland. I had all these in my notes at some point. So like they weren't unaware of the Viking Age, but they also didn't call it that. It wasn't anything like that. They knew that they had two kings who had come from Norway, Sven and Canute. Sven Forkbeard and Canute were kings of Norway, also kings of England at the same time. That was completely in their lineage. They were aware of that. But the Viking Age as a concept didn't exist. And it was kind of created by scholars during the Victorian Age, which of course they wouldn't have called it the Victorian Age while they were living in it. So it's kind of like we're living in our own history right now. We just don't know it type situation. And so, but Vikings, even the word Viking didn't enter the English language till after Victoria was on the throne. So, when she was crowned, Viking was not in the OED, was not in the Oxford English Dictionary at the time. So by the time she was off the throne, by the time she had died, there were cigarettes named after Vikings, and plays and soaps, and it was the big thing. So it was one of those things.
So I have been told, and I really try very hard. I don't say Viking, I say Norse. Is that more correct? So what's the correct thing to say about that group of folks from up north?
So Norse technically means Norway. So the word Norse and Norway comes in there. Nordic is a little more accurate because Nordic civilization, Nordic related civilizations will cover Denmark, Finland, Norway, Iceland, Sweden a little bit better. That's the latest language. Language is always shifting, and language it's kind of a thing I have a pet peeve about. And even the term Viking Age, if you look at Wikipedia in the Viking Age, it lists the dates from the Lindisfarne attack to Battle of Hastings as the Viking Age. Now, that's the Viking Age, but technically it's only the Viking Age for England. So, and it's also wrong because the first Viking attack on England was not Lindisfarne. It actually happened about 4 or 5 years before that in southern England when these Norwegian traders came and the sheriff went to go meet them, and the sheriff was killed by them. And that's in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. And then it's later noted, in addition to one of the versions of the Chronicle, that this is the first attack from the men from the north or something along those lines. And then we call the end of the Viking Age the Battle of Stamford Bridge / Battle of Hastings in 1066, because that's when Harold Hardrada attacked. And that was the last attack, but it wasn't the last attack, not even in England. A friend of mine is at university in Utrecht in Sweden, and they don't use the term Viking Age over there because it's really different. It's the late Iron Age to them. So it's the same thing. People say the medieval period. What they technically mean is the European medieval period, because there were medieval periods all over the world. It's like, my biggest pet peeve is the classical age and the classics, because who decided they were classic? It's like a bunch of old white men figured like the Romans and the Greeks had it right, so they call it the classics, instead of the early Mediterranean civilization or something along those lines. So language can be problematic in a lot of ways.
Well, especially for you as a translator, that's gotta,
It does give you some idea of what people were thinking at the time and some of what their mindset may have been. There's some indication by the language they choose to use. So in the Victorian Age, Vikings were more about heroic romanticism type things, not necessarily the bloodthirsty battle things that they've turned into in some people's mindsets. So they had a completely different idea of what the Vikings were.
Right.
So I want to check my work. What does Viking really mean? I want to make sure I'm teaching the right thing.
So Viking is basically the best way to say it's pirate. It's a job. So and the word does show up in Anglo-Saxon, Viking, all that. So it is an occupation. These men and possibly occasionally women were raiders and pirates, and they were farmers and otherwise, or rulers and jarls, and then they on the summers they went and found easy money.
Is it a verb as well? To go a Viking?
To go a Viking, as far as I know, it still is. A Viking is still a thing. I know some people debate that, but that's still acceptable in academia as far as I know. Yeah, what's not acceptable in academia anymore, which is shaming right now, is actually the term Anglo-Saxon. So Anglo-Saxon has fallen out of favor mostly because it's been used by white supremacists for so long as basically meaning white. And also the Anglo-Saxons did not call themselves Anglo-Saxons. So they called themselves the English. They called themselves, different things like that. But Bede and Alfred and all them were calling themselves English or English or some version of that. So there's a schism in academia about the term Anglo-Saxon right now. So I'm trying to get it out of my language and use early English instead of Anglo-Saxon, but all the literature up to this point is still included Anglo-Saxon, so you're still using that literature.
It's so sad that the white supremacists keep stealing cool stuff.
Well, and this is where my master's project and my eventual PhD project come into play, is as I'm researching all this stuff, and you start typing in things like Anglo-Saxon and things like that, I keep coming up against so much white supremacy stuff that this has actually now fueled my research. And I've gone from being a medievalist to a reception of medievalism. And, it's kind of where I ended up focusing on my research at the university is, how has this been received and changed and twisted? Some of it was Victorians who were doing it. A lot of it was the Nazis who were doing it. A lot of the stuff we still see today that people call Viking or Norse or all that is actually just straight up Nazi imagery that don't exist anywhere else. And you can go on Etsy and buy pretty necklaces and stuff like that are straight stuff taken from the SS. So, and sold as Viking jewelry. And you see it in all places. And in my eventual paper, I am including the trim gate of the SCA. As part of that, where they had the swastikas on the trim. Is it historically accurate? Was it, did it need to be out there? Should it have been out there? Those the type of questions. So,
are you aware of that incident, Lucas? Was that before so you were?
No. I was around for that too.
I think everybody knew about that, but just in case, there was a pair of royals at their coronation who wore trim with swastikas. It was an original, not original, it was period trim. However, it had swastikas, and since those have been now are a sign of white supremacy, white nationalism, Nazis, there was a big outcry in the SCA and the royals. The trim was burned, and those royals stepped down from the throne.
That I didn't know. Wow.
The trim was also a lot larger than the original trim was, so it kind of stood out a lot more in size. Like the original was much narrower, and they had big, wide trim on their coats when it did it.
Well,
so,
I mean, I had to go through my classroom. I had to purge it. I mean, I have all manner of things hanging up in there, and then I realized that they're using imagery that maybe somebody would walk in my classroom and misconstrue. So it was like, well, let me take that down.
So how do we, as people who care about this stuff, how do we get back the Nordic jewelry symbols, or do we just let it go?
There are some things that the swastika will never be recovered. That's done. Which and any version of it too. So there's a lot of different versions of it. There are there are merchants in the SCA that I know are not racist, whatever, but they've done actual recreations of jewelry that technically might be construed as a swastika, or because it is a replica of an actual piece. And I have one of those that I used to wear as a cloak pin and all that. And it's like, because it's dragon heads and really cool things, but it's a four-armed cross dragon head that curves around. It's like, no, probably not. But I don't know that we can recover some of those things. We have to be aware of the pieces we choose. I mean, there's the thing in the Olympics, a lot, not this Winter Olympics, the previous one. You've lost me. Can you hear me still?
We
We can
hear
hear you
you.
fine, yeah.
Your picture froze. So turn off your camera. Oh no, you're back.
There we go. Okay, I saw the thing. Previous Winter Olympics, the Norway ski team had sweaters that had runes across them. Mm-hmm. And they were perfectly good runes, but they were misconstrued as being white supremacists because they were runes that were used by other people as well. So that was a problem. That was a concern, and they had to defend themselves. There are certain versions of the runes. Guido von List, who was in the Volkisch movement prior to the Nazi regime, the Third Reich, he influenced them. He redesigned and redefined a lot of the runes. So, like one of the ones you see now, which is actually the symbol of the American Nazi Party, is the Odell rune, which kind of looks like a diamond with two legs on it.
Yes.
The two legs, that's part of the Elder Futhark. That's a thing. When the two legs turn up at the end, that's actually a Nazi-designed rune, a Guido von List rune. So during the presidential debates, GOP thing at some point in Florida a year or two ago, their stage was designed like an Odell rune. It was they didn't say they were doing that, but if you looked at it from above, like that's the Nazi version of the rune on the ground. That's the lit up stage. So people in academia and other places picked up on that and were wondering if it was that kind of dog whistle thing. But I don't know that there are things we can recover, and then there's ones that come, the one you see the most often in the SCA and Viking jewelry and things, it's the black sun. It's like a big circle design. It's the S rune, the lightning bolt rune, the Sig rune, done in a spiral around a black sun. And people are like, it's this Viking symbol. The only place that symbol exists is in the castle that Himmler used for the SS religious ceremonies. So it is done in black marble on the floor of that. And it is sold today as this Viking symbol, but it never existed in the Viking Age. It didn't exist until the 1930s.
So, but things like the Volknut, like that's been misappropriated too, right? I mean, the
Volknut, the Thor's hammer, those have all been misappropriated. The Volknut did exist in the Viking Age. It was, it's on runestones. So those are things. And you just have to be aware that if you're going to have those in jewelry, in garb, tattooed, that you may be perceived a certain way. One of the things I'm always amused by this is me being the queer liberal man that I am, but walking around wearing nothing but camouflage half the time and having the big beard and the buzz cut, I kind of blend into the other side a lot. And I kind of feel a little, other than I actually wear this on purpose because, I'm the big scary guy with the beard walking behind the young girls at campus as I'm going to class. I'm like, it's like, no, it's okay. Don't worry about me. It's okay. But at the same time, my husband laughs at me because I've been in the military since 2012 and I still wear nothing but like army green colors and black and gray. And I'm still that guy. So I always have a knife in my pocket and I'm usually wearing boots and jeans, even when I'm working my admin job. But so it's like, I look like the other side, but that's always the concern.
So was it a natural choice for you persona wise? Was it like, did you have to think at all before you settled on Ceadda?
I actually did go by a Gaelic name that I had chosen previously, which, if I can say it correctly, which pronouncing Gaelic is always fun, Críothna Finnebid. So, which basically is like a Gaelic version of like Fox or something like that, because Fox has always been my symbol. I was nicknamed Fox by one of my first boyfriends, so I have little fox emblems everywhere. That was made by Uller, little fox mask back there. But shifting in Anglo-Saxon was kind of felt like a natural move to me. Ceadda is an Anglo-Saxon earliest version known of my mundane name, Chad. He was a bishop and a saint in York, England. So all that just kind of tied together for me. It's the only earliest known name of that. I'd love to say that I was named after the Saint Chad, but I was actually named after this really misogynistic, horrible soap opera star from the 70s my mom liked. You know, he was on a talk show and he talked about his three favorite possessions were his horse, his wife, and his dog in that order.
Oh.
And Lily Tomlin was on the show and walked off in protest.
Good on her. She's awesome.
But like I would love to tell people, it's like, no, I'm named after the 7th century bishop. Sure.
Right. All right, Lucas, it's your turn.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask, like, you've taught lots of classes. What's the best class you ever took? SCA1.
I like academic lectures. I'm the nerd that, especially the year I was in York, England studying, any lecture that came up, I don't care what hour it was, I was there for it. So academically, my favorite was on troll women in the Eddas. The woman, someone taught a class on like female representation of trolls. That was great. In the SCA, can I name a specific class? I don't know that I can. I mean, I like those academic style lectures where people talking about some kind of minute, detailed part of a culture or something that was important to those people. And I found those things. I just took one recently at Royal University Mid-Rome on Viking marriage practices. So like that was, and how these were done and where we get this research from and what's debatable in the knowledge and where are the gaps in that knowledge.
So do you get excited when you attend those classes? Because I do. Then I got to go home and I got to research the heck out of everything.
Especially when they're like on Zoom and things, I have to hold back from inputting too much information. So I was like, oh, what about this? Oh, what about this? What about this? Because I want to like type it onto the chat, and then I realized that's probably distracting to people. Because the Viking marriage class was great, and she's talking about reasons people get divorced. And there's a great saga in the part about there's a Un in Iceland. And she is basically this woman who, like, she had a husband, he died. She had another husband, he died. So by the third husband, she basically gets to like rule her own sake. And she like moves to Iceland, has all these kids, marries them off along the way at different places and different settlements before she gets to Iceland. So she is ruling this little matriarchal empire. And so that's part of the story. But the other part of the story in that one is a woman goes and seeks a divorce because her husband slept with a queen over Norway. And that queen was a witch and cursed him with an enormous member that never went down. And so he was too big to give her pleasure, so she could seek divorce.
Wow.
All right.
I'm like, that was a fascinating. Like, so I'm like, oh, yeah, this you can be divorced if this is the reason. This is in the sagas. So I had to stop myself from all those classes about, especially it's so easy on a Zoom one to like input the information to chat. I'm like, don't be distracted. Just let them do their class.
Right. Go ahead, Lucas. I could tell.
Do you find yourself pretty forgiving of maybe people who can't put in the research?
Yes.
Would you say it's, yeah? I mean, because again, we've had some people who discussed on the show that, like, their first time out at the SCA, maybe they, some people were like, well, that tunic's wrong and that this is this and whatnot. So you find your.
I'm not one of those who pass a judgment on anything. I am always available to offer advice if they're seeking it. I never like go to people. I'm like, so what you're wearing is wrong, but you could do this if you wanted to. So, and actually I learned this behavior from watching Tinker, our friend Tinker. We were doing an event at the Ren Fair, and there were some people who were part of like the mud show and things like that. But they were really interested in being historically accurate. And she actually asked the woman who was part of the group asked Tinker about this, and Tinker started giving them advice. Tinker was a Rennie as well. The whole crossover between the SCA and the Ren Fair. And I watched that woman in front of me change some of her kit. Like, it's like, oh, a woman like her would have her hair covered. And so she like found a rag to make into a kerchief and did things like that. And I was fascinated at that approach. And so I've always tried to emulate Tinker in that sense that if somebody asks me about something, that I'm happy to offer that advice and lead them the way. But I never want to judge them or pass any judgment. The same thing with the research. There were some classes I took at RUM that, I like to think that now that I'm this semester finishing my master's degree, I can consider myself an academic. And that, I have a lot of training that other people may not have. And there's a lot of passion that went into these classes and research that went into these classes. Was it the best sources they chose? Were they 100% right? Is there scholarship out there that disagrees with them? Yes, but I don't feel that's my place to interrupt them and say at the end of class, by the way, those 3 things you said were completely wrong. Here's the reason why. I'm like, that was really interesting research. What else are you going to do with it? Maybe, what are your other questions? You're going further in this research.
Have you ever been challenged?
I've been challenged by a few people. I have a Laurel. I am apprenticed to a Laurel who is a trained archaeologist. And so he has asked me certain questions about things that he knows about and I have always said, how does that old quote go? The beginning of knowledge is I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if he asks me questions, like I don't know the answer to that. It's like if you do, I want to know more about it. If not, I could still look into it. So, but the beginning of knowledge is saying I don't know.
So, King Uller started something in the mid-realm. I think he was a duke at the time, and wanting us to increase our kit by 10%.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody is interested in the time period that you are into, what we ish call Anglo-Saxon, where would they go to get the stuff to improve their kit 10%?
There are a few vendors that I like because they have the documentation on the website. Historic Enterprises is one of the ones I like for a lot of their tunics and stuff because they are one Regia Anglorum approved, and if you look at the actual website, like their Viking Dark Age stuff, their Anglo-Saxon and Dark Age stuff, they show you this is based off of this dig, and that gives you that. If you want to go for the more research, you can Google that and find that information to see how accurate that type of stuff is. So if you're looking for vendors, I would go there. Improving kit 10%, I think most people could probably improve their kit by looking at the material of the items they're using. So if you're talking about clothing, are you using linen? Are you using wool? Are you using things that are accessible to the people you are attempting to portray? If you want to go more with that, is it the correct weave? Is it the correct color? Is it dyed with natural dyes? We have some great people in my local area. Eleanor is one of them. I love Eleanor. Eleanor took up weaving and has woven her own cloth to make her own dresses and stuff. So, and they are some of the best amazing stuff she's ever made. And I'm completely jealous because I do not have the time for that. I have made my own garb before. At this point, I buy most of my garb because I have a family and I have a house from the 1880s that we are renovating every weekend, and I have academic pursuits I'm going after. It's like I have a sewing machine. It's a little dusty right now. So and I've not really ever hand sewn anything. I'm fine with machine sewn stuff, and as long as it's not visible. So it's like I'm not 100%. I could be better, but yeah, it's to me, it's everything is linen, it's wool, it's leather, it's those type of things. But
right. All right, Lucas.
So, if not 8th century Anglo-Saxon, early English, as we've learned tonight, what else? What other period or place could you see yourself doing the deep dive in and just getting lost in?
I mean, there's some great stuff going on in the 13th and 12th century. I mean, clothing wise, it's just fun. It's like, one of the reasons I think people join the SCA is so you can wear cloaks and swirl around a lot. So I think almost everyone I know, their first piece of garb was a cloak. Because what's better than a kid is throwing on some kind of makeshift Halloween cloak or a towel or a blanket and running around in the woods doing stuff like that. I think a lot of us have done that. So I think the clothing wise in the 12th, 13th century is great. There's some interesting politics going on. There's stuff where with the church and politics that are fun research wise. About churchmen who weren't being very good churchmen because they were going hunting and drinking with their buddies and doing everything else, and wearing pointed shoes when they weren't supposed to be wearing pointed shoes. So there's research-wise, there's a lot of things like that are happening because usually the churchmen were the second and third sons of royal families who wanted to continue doing what they were doing in their teenage years with their buddies, even though they are now officially churchmen.
Strange question. Have you fought? Have you ever done the fighter thing?
Early days in the SCA, I did make some armor and a shield and a sword, and I did some fighting. One of my very first fighter practices was in South Carolina against an extremely notorious duke, who would quit his job to go to Penzic every summer, who didn't take it easy on newbies. And I've done all that, and it doesn't hold any real interest for me. It's like, I would rather take classes. I'd rather do things like run my little photo booth and have fun with that than be out there fighting all day long.
Oh my gosh, we didn't even talk about your photo booth.
I was going to say that's the most awesome segue I've ever heard in my life. Like that.
Thank
right
you.
there.
Was that smooth? Did you like that?
Yeah,
so smooth. So tell us about the photo booth and what that was all about.
So our big event in our barony is Christmas Tourney. We've been doing it for 30-something years now. Our usual location for the Christmas Tourney is a 1970s era civic center that's not very pretty. Being Christmas Tourney, it's a tournament where people bring canned foods and jackets and toys, and we donate them to charities. And so you buy your way in. It's a great charity thing, but it's a lot of fun. And people make the best outfits because it's winter, so you get to wear the fun things and the cloaks and the layers and all that stuff. And then you have these bad paneling and concrete walls and 70s decor everywhere and burnt orange everywhere. It wasn't a good backdrop, and I hated that. So I created a photo booth after I went to a Halloween party, and I had the idea, and I tried to make it self-service at first, where people would like push a button and pose and do it. Didn't work out that great, so I started doing it myself and just getting people in there. But I made a backdrop that looked like a medieval curtain and a swag and a candle and a thing over here. And I just started taking people's pictures. I'm like, you have the good garb on. Here's your chance to take a picture. I brought a chair and stuff, and it's evolved. One year I brought a table and dice and cups, and people like pose like they're in the tavern. The backgrounds have changed. I've done plain backgrounds, and brocade backgrounds, everything else. And I want people to have a nice picture for them to take from the event where they've worn their good clothes. That's not surrounded by water bottles and plastic camp chairs and 1970s decor. And so I started doing that. I bought a cheap DSLR camera. I've tried to teach myself how to use it. I've done some background stuff, and it's become what I do now at Christmas Tourney. I don't charge anything for this. I post all the pictures publicly once I've done a little editing to them, so people could have them. The best feeling in the world is watching everyone's profile pictures change when I upload 200 photos. The worst feeling in the world is like, as I'm just upload the photos to Facebook or Flickr back then or whatever, and people start tagging things like crazy, and it's like I get like hundreds of notifications as everyone's trying to tag the photos for me, and it's like, calm down, people, I got it. But no, I think it's a lot of fun. And there are people that do the very stiff pose and sit in the chair or pose with their husband like a dead person Victorian portrait, and that's fine. My favorite are people have a little more fun with it. Eleanor and Honor here in my barony are some of my favorite people to get into my photo booth and have fun with it and do crazy things. And I've got them to do stuff like that. I started bringing more props. I have swords. I have a human skull that I bring in. I always love giving the human skull to like the little kids because it's so cute. Like you see this angelic little girl holding a human skull. It's like, so those are fun. I was like my little horse thing I have back there. It's a thing I found at Target, but it looks like a Viking Age toy. So I always bring that to hold, like to give the little baby, so you have something to do. There are some great photographers out there. There's one in Poland. I can't find it anymore. I have some of the pictures saved, but he has done some of the high medieval portraits, and it's always like the woman is putting on the armor, and you see the guy's sweat and dirt dripping down his face, and all this. And it's done in a portrait studio. And I'm like, so that's like my next step. My 10% improvement on that is when we have events again, you see me doing this. I am bringing makeup. I am bringing water bottles to create sweat. I am doing all this stuff. My biggest push in the photo booth that I have a hard time doing is the fighters are always out in the field. They don't even want to get their picture taken when they're in their armor. They want to wait till they get cleaned up and put their nice clothes on. I'm like, no, you look awesome. It's like holding being sweaty from the tournament and getting that. It's like, do the picture then. So, and I struggle getting them in there with that. So,
all right, next time. Believe it or not, we're almost out of time. So we told you, man, this hour flies, or 50 minutes that we're at right now. So the final question that we ask everybody: what can the SCA do better?
I don't really know that I have an answer. It's like it's one of those things where I kind of see two SCAs. I am not a fighter. I get that people enjoy the fighting and that is what they are all about, but it seems like people are either about the fighting or they're not. Whether they're a spectator or they're a fighter, they're involved in that, and they want to do that. Or you have the other side, which are merchants, teachers, artisans doing all that. In my view, there's a bit of a divide there. I don't know that if it can be fixed because I'm not interested in the fighting. It's like, I'm not there. I don't find it interesting. So I don't know that it can be fixed myself there. So I don't know that I have a good answer about what the SCA can do better in that sense. I've seen plenty of improvements socially. The fact that we have same gendered barons and baronesses happening in kings and queens, that I love seeing that improvement in society as a queer man myself. Some of my friends have held those positions, and I cheer them on and support them in that. We have other issues in the SCA that are facing. There's a legal case happening in Canada, I think, right now, with a person associated with the SCA and some possible abuse situations. Oh, no. That's news last week about that. So, I mean, and we are making steps towards making those improvements and those background checks and those things, and they are necessary in that sense. Otherwise, event-wise, I'm one of those SCA people. I've never been to PennSec, and I don't know. It's like, it would be fun. It's also during August, and I'm usually working on the house with my husband, or we're going to vacation somewhere. So it's I'm not a person who enjoys sweating out in hot weather all the time, and that tends to be the case. It's like,
that's pretty much life at PennSec.
Does your husband play or no?
No, not really. When an event is local, he will come. He has made his own garb. He has actually sent his own garb. He was a choir director for 20-something years in the Catholic Church, spent his entire life in the Catholic Church singing. So usually when he comes, he dresses up as a monk. He usually has a chalice, which probably has either bourbon or Guinness in it. And then a couple of times he's actually sung for various reasons the SCA. When the leader of my house in the SCA was processing for Crown Tournament, Bill sang in Latin as he walked up, and my husband has a great singing voice, so it was very impressive in that sense. But he doesn't really play. I have told him now, pre-pandemic, the SCA days are the few weekends he gets to himself, where like you can do whatever you want. There's, because I'm not there, you have to worry about anything else, and he still just ends up working in the house because that's our life, is renovating houses.
So what's next for you in the SCA?
I want to be better at photography. I want to be better on getting some of those photography skills in there. I would like to think I'm on the path to being a laurel in some sense, either through research or other reasons. So I've been apprenticed for 9 years now. So he's still working on my belt, by the way. My laurel is a perfectionist, and he's been carving me a bone belt buckle from my apprentice belt for about 9 years because it's not ready yet. So, but and I pick at him all the time. Every time the anniversary comes up, like, oh look, another year of anniversary of me being apprentice, and don't have a belt for it yet.
Wow. All right, so we have like just a couple minutes left, and I did want to ask you a modern world question. What are your goals after you get your PhD? I mean, that's a 2-year plan, 2-year program for you to get it, I'm assuming.
It's a lot longer than that. So I'm doing it part-time because I work full-time at the university.
Oh, that's right.
So we're looking at like a 6 to 7 year plan for that PhD as I chip away at it part-time. That's why my MA has taken so long as well. I've been doing a class or 2 a semester, depending on what the semester looks like. I work in administration at the university in the history department. I'm very comfortable in my job. I get paid decently. My husband gets paid a lot more. I don't have to worry about that. But I don't plan to leave administration. I hopefully, when I have a PhD, will be able to teach a class when I feel like it. So if I want to teach a class on early English and Viking stuff in the history department, I can build a class on that and teach that. I don't want to be a full-time professor because I organize those full-time professors and I deal with students every day, and I don't want to deal with that for a living. So it's, I'm very happy to sit in the admin office and run things from behind the scenes in that sense. Gotcha. So the PhD for me is more for funsies, as I like to say. I'm the first person in my family to graduate high school. So I have an older brother, older sister, and parents who never made it through high school. So I'm going to see as far as I can go with it.
That's awesome.
Congratulations.
So thank you so much for being our guest tonight.
Thank you for inviting me. I really enjoy it.
This was wonderful. Thank you
It
so
was
much.
amazing. Lucas, why don't you take us out?
Well, are you going to tease next week, the 2 weeks guest, or?
No, we have a guest in 2 weeks. That's what I can tell you.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
still locking in.
Mr.
I'm locking in details of this guest. I have to talk to them a little more, but there's other people. The people who fill out the form. That's I've been using the form to get our guests, and we have like 15 more people to work through. But that doesn't mean not to fill out the form. Please
Yeah.
fill out the form and give us suggestions of people that we can talk to.
I can think of like 10 people I want to nominate because they're all awesome people that people need to hear from.
Yeah,
Well,
please
start
do.
Start with Eleanor, because the weaving sounds.
No, we can't. Eleanor's a laurel and a pelican.
Still, I'd like to talk. All right, so I'm gonna take us out. Thank you so much, Ceadda, for joining us tonight. On behalf of Zoph and myself, Lucas, thank you for joining us for Simply SCAdian, no title required.
Thank you.